Well, welcome back to the Modern Job Search Checklist. We're here every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Central, except if you're elsewhere where Sonal is joining us, then it's something else later in the evening, like maybe 7 o'clock or so. But join us every week here, Fridays, 1 p.m., 12 o'clock Central, as I were talking. Hopefully, you guys get started in chat. Tell us where you're from. Tell us and keep us engaged as well. We're trying to keep you engaged as we talk about interviewing. And we want to definitely help you lead your interview or help you with your interview, lead to those offers and to have that discussion, right? So, first of all, my co host, Damian Birkel, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine, thanks. As always, great
Yeah,
to be here.
yes. And our special guest is Sonal Behel. How are you?
Sonal, thank you for having me back, Mark. It's good to be here.
And just so you know, and kind of confession, 5 minutes before you got on, I practiced 20 times to say your first and last name.
You
Just
almost.
so, ju-
I
just
really
so, just so
appreciate
you
it. I
know.
appreciate the effort. You almost you got the last name. The first one is just it's simpler than it sounds. It's
So no.
Sonal.
And you know what? For the past 2 weeks, I've been pronouncing your first name right and your last name wrong.
I'm so sorry.
So I got humble and I went to LinkedIn. I said, I don't need this tool. What is it? I'm glad it's there now because at least I made a valiant effort to kind of connect the name and all of that. And you guys can see her credentials. We don't need to go into it because people in the chat are going to be a lot of the people who watch her every Friday, I believe. At least it's 7 a.m. on the Central, and I believe it's 8 a.m. Eastern, and it's something different in her time zone. So
2
you're
p.m.
caught in
in
the
Belgium. Yeah, I'm 6 hours ahead of Eastern, and
yes.
it's 2 p.m. in Belgium because Asia is getting dinner and bedtime organized. So it's balancing with Europe and Middle East, and it's a whole lot of chaos.
Yes, and a big shout out to Tegan Bartos, who's going to be joining us, I believe, in December on December 3rd, if I'm not mistaken.
Awesome, awesome.
And
She's your neighbor, aren't you guys like
she
next door
is
neighbors?
not that far from me. In fact, we're planning to meet up here soon,
Oh,
if
I'm
not
so
over the
jealous.
holidays. Yeah, it's going to be
I hate
great.
you guys.
But I understand you guys have done some video chats, and
Yeah, that's not the same. Don't try
it's
to
not
make me feel better. It's not the
it's,
same.
it's, it's not the same. So I want to give a shout out to my new buddy here in the Shy, and we're going to go ahead and get started. And if you guys, you always have to remember that we'll always stop what we're talking about to talk about what you need to talk about as far as helping you get to where you're going. And the whole idea is to get interviews, not just to apply to jobs, right? So let's go. Um, Interviews is really a funny thing because everybody, you ask any career coach a question about an interview and you may get different answers each time, and I'll be guilty of saying that I don't always give the same answer every time I
No,
get a question.
no.
So and if you've done this a few thousand times, you'll understand what we mean. But as far as and all three of us have been on the hiring side as well as the job seeker side, but a lot of our experience, particularly between you two, you guys have like 150 years of interview experience from the HR point of view. But what is the one thing that job candidates should stop doing during interviews? Especially if you have it, I mean, pretty much you can time lapse any interview in 2021 and put it back to 2001. But what's the one thing? We're going to start with the girl in the group, Sonal.
Mark, I think you've this is a topic you guys have probably done like to death. I have done to death, and most coaches on LinkedIn have talked about it in text posts and articles, right?
Right.
So I'm gonna give a slightly different approach here.
Okay, go for it.
The thing is, we don't want you to land, convert the interview to an offer. We want you to convert the interview to the offer. We want you to get the job, not any job. Um,
Hmm.
and that mindset shift is critical. And I know words like mindset shift and authenticity and
Gets tossed around a
zone
lot.
of genius, it gets tossed around like free donuts.
Cliche, yeah.
Yeah. Today's live stream that I did was with a headhunter. He's based in London, and he places people around the world. He confirmed what a lot of us are thinking. He's having huge problems placing people.
Mhm,
Clients are, on his back. He's got a very tough time. He's got five positions to close. We've all been on the recruiting side. We know how hard it is. And he said the hardest thing is every single candidate has multiple job offers right now. I'm happy for them, but he's like, it makes my life miserable because it can change last minute. So
mhm,
I really want to stress the fact that this is a candidate driven market. um, and it has been pretty much throughout for the right people. It's been like this pretty much throughout. Maybe a small gap between, in 2020 when it wasn't the case. So what one has to stop doing is one has to stop calling it interviews. Let's stop, because the way I'm going to approach this is the way I'm going to approach all active single people today who are not looking at dating, just, look for fun, but they're looking at seriously getting married. Now, what do when they want to seriously get married? They go on dates that they've been set up on, right? By
mhm,
friends or maybe by an app. So when they're preparing for those meetings, they'll be like, who am I going to be meeting? Let me Google this person. Okay.
mhm,
And they have a few questions they've thought about. Good. But at the same time, they're not thinking, please God, I want to land, I want to end up with this person, because they don't know yet. So you've got to approach it with a very open mind and be like, okay, this is really interesting. It's a conversation. So this is the way I think of it in the early stages,
mhm,
when you don't know the company yet, you don't know the culture, you don't know the people. You're checking for fit, just like those guys are checking for fit. You're not being arrogant, you're not naive, and it's not like candidate driven market. So you have the upper hand. I would say it's always been equal. But so many times, Mark, Damien, you probably have experience when things look great on paper and then you sign and then you start, you're like, holy heck, what is this place? Behind the curtains, and you're like, wow. I mean, the honeymoon period lasted like 8 hours and then
Right.
it's over. And then they're like, welcome to this mess. And then you realize the people are actually not the way you thought they were, and the role and the company and the industry, etc., etc. So you want to be able to do that homework, and you want to do it honestly. So when you approach things from a point of view of conversation in the early stages, the stakes don't feel so high. The
mhm,
pressure is not that much. You show up the way you show up normally. It's less of a theater performance, and it's more you checking them out and them checking you out. And you're like, it's just like that. You want to meet again? Yes. Oh, fantastic. Great. And if they don't want to, you had some hunches, your instincts were telling you this is maybe not the. So that is the way I would approach it, as opposed to, oh my gosh, this is an interview. It's like an exam. I have to prepare. What if they don't like, all of those, I would say pre 2020 way of thinking. That's what
mhm.
I would urge every single person to do, because half the people listening today, Mark, will say, this girl is on crack. Like, what is she saying? She doesn't understand. But you need to get it. And one day you will get it. There's a company which is the right company, and it's waiting for you. Maybe you haven't found it yet, but it's there. It doesn't mean you have to kiss every single frog that comes en route. Anyway,
Mhm.
I'm done speaking with my weird analogies, but I hope I kind of made some sense.
Well, I think your analogy is valid. The thing I think about, I think people are nervous on the first date because they're trying to make a great impression, because we're told that the first impression is going to be the most. That's going to decide whether,
And we
that
do,
I'm
right?
going to
So that first
continue.
date, we want to look good. We put on a great perfume. We do want to put on our best foot forward. I'm not saying don't do that, but it's not about like, I hope they say yes. That's what I think, because you don't know that yet.
Right, you're not at the asking stage, you're at the discovery stage, and
Yes.
so, the advice I give young people now, I said, "Go try to have fun the first few times
Yes.
and don't worry about that." Unfortunately, that doesn't really work, as much for interviews because you're not having fun, but you are trying to lay groundwork for, of course, a conversation, and hopefully it's not gonna be a real heavy one, the first one, so that message is well received, Sonal. Thank you very much. And Damien, I know that you have thoughts and strategies and all that, but I'm going to try to hold you to one for right now. But overall, I know the dating analogy resonates with you as well.
It does. And what I hope job candidates stop doing is stop talking so much. Listen more,
Mhm.
align yourself with the interviewer better, and always remind yourself that if it's a first interview, your only job is to get a second interview, and that throughout the dance, throughout the process, the best way to communicate to the person that's interviewing with you is from the stance of be the answer.
Mhm.
Be the answer to the employer's needs. And at the same time, you'll get a feel for um, what the company is like, what the people are like, but don't lunge at it just because you need a job. And also, don't disregard the inner messages that you're getting, because if your intuition, even after the first interview, is telling you that there is just something wrong about this fit, there's something that feels funny about this company, um, listen to the inside you, because I can tell you, and Mark, I've said this many times before, but
Mhm.
every time when it's come to a job that I have gone against my intuition, it has always ended up spectacularly bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think people tend to, they're still waiting to be chosen. I really think that it's sort of like they date. It becomes a meat market to some people, and that's when it often goes bad, and you never get the satisfaction. You're hoping to please the other person more so than you having the mutual respect. So I think that that's very valid, and I think the same happens. I think the way I look at it, the same thing applies that it did back in all these things again. If we turn back the clock, the same habits are the same ones that people do now that turn off employers are the same ones that turn employers off, back then. But one thing that job seekers tend to do that I think that they tend to stifle themselves. And in essence, it comes in between what you guys have said, that they are waiting to be interrogated, and they're waiting to be asked that magic question that the big reveal will come out in this first interview, when first interview now really isn't a first interview if you look at it, because you really don't talk, and we talked about this before. Your first interview isn't the with a human being, may not be till the fourth interview or fourth part of the interview, because the first one you are talking to somebody that's doing a phone screen. The second one, they tell you for the second one, they tell you to, interview with this avatar. The third one is a behavior interview, and sometimes even there's a third and fourth one where you're taking some kind of assessment, and then you get to talk to a human being. And by then, your expectations aren't leveled, because you think because you got that far, that means it means something. Where really, there's some other people that are going through the same thing, and more than likely, interviewers are not just interviewing just one person. They are strategically hoping to interview several people. So if you get that idea or you get the feeling that you're being put off, they say, well, wait till we get a hold of you and it's been 2 3 weeks. They're trying to come up with somebody else to compare you to.
Yeah.
And it usually go sometimes, uh, all that to say that the other thing I think is during the interview process, if you will, is the job seekers stops looking for another job interview. Very often they'll start to rely on that interview because they're in the process and they're told we'll be in touch. And you tend to ride that horsey until it's dead. And then they never become in touch again in many cases, which we've talked about in other shows. But all in all, is that you don't have to be the lame duck in the interview or during the interview process. You should also be interested in what that person thinks who's in front of you, as well as to look for other people to interview or to have those conversations with, not just the one employer because you can't afford it. Because the competition's way too heavy these days, and it's way heavy, especially for the real, what we would consider for the good jobs. So therefore, I think that that's something that job candidates do. Don't settle. Don't settle. It's like going using Sonal. You don't just go on one date and think that's going to be the one.
And that's the funny thing. You just said something. A company is not stupid. They're not wasting their time only interviewing you. It's a very expensive process. So they're
Yeah,
interviewing strategically multiple candidates. Why can't you do the same?
right.
You interview
Absolutely.
strategically multiple companies. You're mirroring. It's not a bad thing. This is the practical world we live in.
Yeah, I wrote a LinkedIn post that says, well, you know that companies are interviewing even one candidate 14 times. Jack had somebody that he was recruiting, and that person had four. They got the job, but they were lucky. There are other people who have spelt out and cried over spilt milk, and to some degree complained, and rightfully so, on LinkedIn that it's exhaustive
Yeah.
and it's tiresome. So if they're interviewing a bunch of folks, you need to interview
Yeah.
with and have conversations with a bunch of folks. Why people often stop with one or two and thinking that they have to work from a poor man's point of view. There's lots of companies are hiring, and sometimes they're not going to tell you are hiring. You got to put yourself in position to
and
get
and
there.
hope is not a strategy, right? My one of my
Right.
favorite TV shows is Downton Abbey, and Dowager Countess Grantham says, never mistake a wish for a certainty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
gotta
Yeah.
gotta be practical in life.
Yeah, it's often Charlie Brown and Lucy. Lucy always pulls the football.
That's right.
Always. And no matter what she may, and companies do that. They'll convince you and say, we've got this guy, and you are probably right, but they've told that to, thousands of folks. So you just can't buy into that. So anybody want to add, Damien, do you want to add any additional thoughts to that?
I do. One of the things that I tell folks that I'm working with when they say, "Oh man, I finally got a job interview. It went really great." I say, that's terrific. Now go out and find a minimum of three others, because there was a study that was done by the 5 o'clock Club that uh, candidates that were searching, that were in the interview process, um, 8 out of every 10 times, 8 times, the position was not offered to them for a reason that they could neither plan nor predict or
Mhm.
control. And you, as a job seeker, interview much better when you have other opportunities that are in that pot for you, because of the fact that if this particular job, for whatever reason, doesn't work out, you don't have to start all over again. You have two or three other opportunities that are in play. And in a best case scenario, many times one, two, and three will all come into the chute about the same time. And
Mhm.
then you can negotiate from a very
Good
strong
position.
position
Yeah, very
within the
good.
three. Mhm. So,
That's
yeah,
the frustrating thing. There's a drought for an extended period of time, and suddenly when it rains, it pours. But that's the way
Mhm.
it is.
absolutely.
Yeah. If you've done all that that you can do. But I think I'm gonna add a second one here, and based on what Damien just said, and I'm not trying to be greedy and take up time. I think there's a point to this, and I think people get caught in this. People get sentimental really quick about
Yeah,
a good conversation.
yeah,
Yes.
And and two things often happen. People don't leave companies faster because they get sentimental about who they work with, and but yet if they really took themselves out of the conversation, the company didn't care about you as much as they do about themselves. But
Amen.
also the fact that you have a few good conversations doesn't mean that they really like you. They like you to a certain point. They may kiss you on the cheek, but they're not willing to hold your hand, if that makes any
I'm
sense.
so glad you said that, Mark, because this is where the dating analogy comes to an end. Because the emotional side, we're not getting married.
Right.
You're with companies, they're like, no, but they really like me, and it's gonna work out. So I'm gonna
Right.
say no to the others. They'll drop you. I mean, my dad's favorite advice: there's many a slip between the cup
Hmm.
and the
Mm.
lip. He's been saying that to me forever, especially when I was dating this guy who now is my husband. I was acting like as if the deed is done, and he was like, "Hold on, hold on." So that stayed with me. So it can change like the last kilometer, the last mile. You don't know, somebody weird comes in, or they pull the offer, or budget is done. Then what?
Right. You're
Yeah.
stuck.
You're
Yeah.
you're something.
Yeah. 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 You're stuck. And
Yeah.
Tegan says 14 interviews is obnoxious. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. And I've talked to some that have had as many as 10. I've talked to a few that, there's a what do you do? And I'm good. And part of one of the question comes from that conversation from a couple of weeks ago but we'll save that for last. But yeah, I think that people have to really stop holding on to something that isn't there yet. And you're right, the dating analogy kind of stops because you're not going to ever get married, even if you like them a lot. Even if you like them so much, you want to you don't become sentimental with the company,
No,
because it never ends well at all. It just
no.
doesn't.
Yeah.
Mark, very quick last point.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm shout out to Jack Kelly, who's your Wednesday host, because he and I chatted about this once. And anything which is 10 to 14 interviews, there's a very clear problem in that company because there's
Yeah.
decision making process. There's a broken down process when it comes to, and they are nobody has the guts to say I draw a line in the sand. So that's also not a great sign
Hmm.
of company culture that you want to be a part of, because on paper they'll say we are agile, and all of these cool things we do. We have articles on LinkedIn and Harvard Business Review, and then it comes to hiring someone, and they're like dangling the person for 8 months.
Well, I'm just going to go ahead and say companies lie. And they're
Oh
not,
yeah,
and they lie, and they're not objective about themselves, no matter how many employees they have. And we can see it. We see it in the news, and people are telling on those companies. And every company will have a closet full of skeletons that
Amen.
they'll have to deal with one particular point or another. So, you know, and neither should we expect them to be perfect. I mean, we just need to stop with the
yeah,
expectations and the
yeah.
sentimentality. Let's go on to the next one. Um, there's a lot of questions that that job candidates get tired of, and we probably even mentioned some of them. let me rephrase it. What questions should we wish that would go away? And I know there's a whole bunch of questions that often ask, like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And, tell me about yourself and those kind of questions. What questions do you wish that would go away from the interview process? And the reason why I bring this up, because I think the way that candidates and job seekers think about these questions, the attitudes in their past, it triggers their past and their attitudes, and it comes out in their interviews. So they might as well figure out some ways to kind of quash the way that they come across in an interview, because interviews is about presentation, right? Whoever has the best presentation often wins. But if yours is full of ghosts and the interviewer can sense that, then it may not end up well. But to help us expose some of this, what would you say? What answer, or better yet, what question you wish would go away because of the answer? Maybe it's a better way to phrase that question. Damien, I'm going to start with you because you obviously have got this nailed already.
I wish, I don't know why people do it. Google does it, Facebook does it, but some of these ridiculous gotcha questions,
Mhm.
like how many ping pong balls fit into a DC-10? Or can you tell me, please, how many light bulbs are in Midtown Manhattan? Now, I understand that those are to put a person on the spot to see how they can react to a very disorienting situation and see how quickly they react on their feet. But having been asked questions like that, you could have been in a great kind of space with the interviewer and feel really good. And then such a question like that is so jarring to most people, not every interviewer, that it can undo such a good impression that you've built throughout the interview, and it's really not necessary. It puts the interviewer here, and it puts the person
Mhm.
being interviewed all the way down at the bottom. And again, I understand why they do it, but I would think that any person who's ever been interviewed uh, would wish that trick questions would go away.
That's a great point. And I'm not sure. I've seen some trick questions in my past, and I've been on the other end of some quick trick questions. But not only they are turn off, but it tells a lot about the person that asks it,
Hmm.
because they're looking for something that's not there. And very often, I think it's more of a fishing expedition. I don't know how you feel about them, Sonal, but I
I
it's,
I was
they're
gonna
just
I was gonna start with them, but Damien already stole my thunder. How many pens can you fit in a house? Like, oh my God, kill me now. Um, it's either like these or I call these butt questions boring, either boring, unoriginal, or traditional. It
love it.
feels like someone in the 1950s. I'm pretty sure
Hmm.
this is true. I'm not making it up. Someone in the 1950s or early 1960s wrote an interview handbook. Like, these are the top questions to ask. And for some godforsaken reason, this handbook has been passed on decade to decade till to 2021. And we have a hangover from that book or set of books. And we're still continuing to ask those questions. We are not questioning them. So, for example, what are your greatest weaknesses?
Hmm.
Okay, you want to know that? Find out what they failed at. There is a way to ask. Behavioral questions are there. You can get the outcome without being so pointed. Like, I just met you 20 minutes ago and you want to know what I'm weak at? Like, how weird are you? And how invasive are you?
Hmm.
Where do you think you'll be 5 years from now? Okay, buddy, I bet you don't know where your company is going to be 5 years from now. I don't even know what I'm having for lunch tomorrow. Like, let alone, like, my Indian, when I get angry, my Indian accent comes out. Like, I don't know what I'm having for lunch tomorrow. And you want to know what I'm doing like 5 years from now. So, obviously, you have to give these answers that sound smart, and I have all these formula to help, my clients and my YouTube viewers, and be like, oh, focus on learning, focus on growth. Yes, but stop asking all of that stuff, and instead, you know get to know the person as well as you can. Will they get along with your team? Are they adding something to the picture? Not culture fit, but culture add. Are they bringing a new set of eyes which you don't have? Etc., etc. So, that hangover, like, somebody's just got to drink some avocado juice and get that hangover out and face the world we live in.
Mhm.
Because the pity is, young people are also being trained on those ways of interviewing. 21, 22-year-old who's getting into HR or recruiting is still asking those questions. And I hope people start questioning that more and more and saying, hey, there's a better way.
That's a very interesting perspective because I think there have been a couple of times when I interviews that I didn't get the job that I would ask, I said, "Uh, so what are you looking for with this particular question?" And one question, and I said, is there a more direct question you can ask? One was that one got me in a lot. That one was one that I got a job with because one of my
Mm.
mentors actually asked that question in a whole different scenario. But I said, is there a more direct question? Because, one, interviewers are not trained to
No.
interview.
Mhm.
I mean, maybe one or two out of 10 are, but everybody else, they're not. In fact, it's the last thing on their list. They don't want to interview because they know interviews suck.
Yep.
They know interviews suck, and they know that because they went through the company interview with that same guy, and he said, "Oh, he's gonna suck, and I don't want to be a part of it, but I got to now."
Mhm.
But the other half too is that sometimes they're just like, "Tell me about yourself." I hate it. I understand the purpose. I know you want to get people to talk, but it lacks any kind of depth that you're looking for. It never ends the way that nobody's ever been impressed by saying, "Wow, I love the way you told me about yourself." Nobody's ever stopped to do that. Have you guys? No, I haven't.
Uh,
It- I mean, you might be okay. They speak well, but that was just the first question.
it's just
And
the
there are
first.
times
Yeah. Yeah.
that I will, but nobody just stops and say, "Well, I'm really impressed with that." In fact, for only so long you can keep a poker face
Right.
because most of the answers are horrible. But the other one that bothers me is what is your greatest weakness?
Yeah.
Oh,
N- First of all, how can greatest and weakness go together? I don't know what logic that we. So I get where people want to go, but
mhm.
how many of those times you really get the truth out of someone? Unless it's Superman said, "Did my greatest weakness is doggone it is kryptonite." And,
Kryptonite.
I mean, other than that, anything else is kind of it dissipates in air, and it doesn't mean a whole lot because nobody makes a decision based on somebody's greatest weakness unless they completely botch it. Say, yes, I stole some money once. Oh, okay, this is not a confession. But really, and you've been in those rooms, I'm sure you guys have, because you've done it thousands of times, where you've interviewed somebody and somebody just confessed to a crime or
Yes.
something
Yes.
near to a crime,
I have
and
clearly
it's
not been
like you
hanging out
just
in the same
turned it
fun
off.
rooms as you guys. Nobody
Yeah.
confessed to a crime when I was
Well,
interviewing.
I may not. It may not be steal a bank or something, but somebody once confessed to me that they were sued. That they sued the company that they worked for because of X, Y, and Z. That's not something you want to come out in an interview, but it
Ah, yeah.
happened. It
Yeah.
happened. Of course, we couldn't hire that person, but doggone, it's like so. All that to say is that there's just some questions that really don't have any depth to it other than it's something that somebody just passed on to them because it was a good idea. They don't know what to ask. So that's what the greatest weakness is. Tell them about self. Those questions. It just gets
Yeah.
passed on, but there's no depth. There's no reason.
They gotta go.
Yeah, that absolutely. It but I think at the same time, I think job seekers need to become savvy at asking
Yes.
those questions
Mhm.
because you're gonna get to ask the questions that really
Yeah.
suck.
Yeah.
And
And
the
you
weak
have go ahead,
so
Damien.
I was gonna say, and the weakness question is kind of a lose-lose from the standpoint is there's another trick question. If you tell them what you're really weak at, then in many cases you can knock yourself out of the interview. If you come up with a clever response like, well, if you were to talk to the people I work with, they tell you that I work too hard, then the interviewer is thinking bull crap.
Yeah,
So there is no really good way to answer that question.
it's a
And so,
lose-lose.
yeah, so why stop? You're killing me. But
Yeah, yeah.
anyway,
But that, and I think there was an exercise that I was a part of years ago, where we would ask to help people interview. We asked them the worst questions possible, and it was like a panel interview, and it was a mock interview. But the whole idea was for them to answer in the worst way, so that it could be come out and be trained, because people really get more out of, and we found at that time anyway, in the situation we were in, we found that people need to have the worst come out, so that it could be dealt with, they could get trained on it, and it can go back and recalibrate their answers. And I
mhm,
think it was an excellent strategy for that particular situation, because most people, they're terrible at interviewing. Yeah,
mhm.
they just are, when you come into it. Some of the comments, Nikisha or Nashika says that my weakness is interviewing. Yeah, if we're all honest, all of us all of us are really, because it's not set up for us to succeed. It's a cattle call. It's to find out who would be the better of the worst candidates in some sense,
Right.
or might be the best of the worst, or something like that. I mean, it's perspective, but we get it. Tegan says that she says it loves companies like Salesforce who set candidates up for success. You get a great list of exact hiring process, including questions in the project template. Now that's refreshing. Uh, I don't know many companies who've even done that, but I've heard Salesforce a lot of positive things about them. So, if you guys don't have anything to add, or if you have anything to add, now's the time, or we'll move on to the next topic.
No, I just want to say whether we like it or not, it is what it is. Otherwise,
Mhm.
we're in a echo chamber. We don't like it. We bash these questions up, but as an active job seeker, you got to know the rules of the game so you can know which ones to break, which ones to keep for yourself. And people like Mark, people like Damien, people like myself, we do have certain ways to answer these boring, unoriginal, traditional questions. Get around to learning them. That's part of your prep, and that's one of the things that will help you to stand out, because you're not going to be working with that recruiter for the rest of your career. It's only, you know what I mean, it's like it's an obstacle course. You don't like this
Mhm.
particular obstacle, doesn't matter, go through it, around it, under it, over it. We're going on a bear hunt. And then get to the other side, because eventually you want to, it's more about the destination.
Yeah, I think it is true. It is more about the destination. I think more people realize that, but I think, going back to some of the things, people don't get that because it's hard to. Unfortunately, there's pressure to perform. There
Mhm.
just is, and for a lot of people, they can only handle so much of pressure, like most human beings can. But they feel like, I think the sweet spot is really in the preparation, and how well you prepare for an interview makes all the difference in the world. Just because you may have been interviewing for a lot of jobs over your lifetime, which most people will. I think the young people
Mhm.
coming up, they need to prepare to change jobs or situations 15 to 25 times. I just think it's going to be that much. Those days of being a job, having 4 or 5 jobs in a lifetime, that is overdone and dead. But you should be ready to change, and what expectations of interviewing is also going to change throughout time. So, in your estimation, and you probably have given it based on the discussion, uh, your best preparation interview tip, and I know we didn't discuss that before that, but I think it's a good time now to kind of give some actionable items for the peoples who are watching. Uh, Damien,
Sure.
why don't you
Uh,
lead us off?
as the king of losing his job, um, one of the things that I used to do, and it's a great way, by the way, to reduce anxiety, especially when I was traveling back in the days before Zoom, where they actually would fly you to the job site to interview.
Mhm.
Uh, I had a list of the 99 most frequently asked questions. And while I was traveling, I was quizzing myself. And then the night before the interview, I'd quiz myself, but also make sure I went to bed relatively early. And by having answers to whatever it is, top 25, top 50, top 100, whatever you're comfortable with, just by having answers to those questions, 9 times out of 10, the question that you're dreading the most will never get asked. And
Mhm.
if it does get asked, you will have already worked out an answer in one form, shape, or another, because ultimately, this is your interview. And the other thing, a mindset that I had as I would walk in, is also to realize that in addition to concentrating on building rapport and um, being the answer, demonstrating my abilities as they meet the needs of the position, but also realizing that I had just as great, uh, I could basically interview the person that was interviewing me just as rigorously as they were interviewing me, because, you know, I too, as a candidate, have a right to at least get a feel for what I'm getting myself into. And having 4 or 5 really insightful questions prepared so that at the end of the interview, when they say, "Do you have any questions?" you're ready to go. That puts you in a good mindset, because you're going in as an equal, not the person being very high and you being very low. And when you go in with that perspective, you relate to that person as a potential coworker and not somebody way up in the clouds that you need to cower in fear as you're interviewing with.
Yeah, that's sort of related to what Sonal said just said about mindset, right? So,
Mhm.
100%. And I think this question alone, Mark, can be a whole hour. So if I have to um, make a short version of this in terms of preparation, who is it who said the harder I work, the luckier I get, the more. And there's the best strategy is always to be over prepared. Again, one of my favorite quotes is from Downton Abbey by I think it's Carson: never leave anything to chance, my lady. So I like to keep things simple, because one can get overwhelmed with preparation. What do I do? What do I do? So I have a 3 step process, very simple. CPR, the CPR approach. C stands for company. You want to find out as much as you can about the company, call up people, find out about the culture, look at the websites, look at social media, check out Twitter, check out Instagram, check out their earnings call, all the stuff that you can. And you got to put on your detective hat. There are no shortcuts. Chances are you're not like Obama, who has a press briefing team who can do all that for you. You got to do it yourself. It is completely worth it, because it shows when you open your mouth, it distinguishes you from others who are speaking bullcrap from like superficial level. So that's C. P stands for 2 things: position and problem. So when you look at the job opening, the description, you've got to read it every like few days with a new fresh set of eyes and understand what is the problem they want to solve. Why have they opened this position up? It's such an expensive process for them. And you'll find out, okay, it comes down to cost saving. Oh, okay, it comes down to they're having problems in sales. They will not maybe say it out loud in so many words. You got to read between the lines. That's the problem. That's the position. And the third one is R, which is recruiter slash interviewer. I like R because it's CPR.
Mhm.
And you want to do a little bit of homework on these people. I mean, don't be the stocky person who goes on their Facebook and sees how many kids and how many dogs they have. But at the same time, LinkedIn, you can be as stocky as you want on LinkedIn. You're allowed. You can see where they were before. Maybe you were in the same college, or you have a friend who went to the same school or a volunteer association or whatever. And with the CPR approach, come up with, I don't know, 10 questions, maybe three, 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 something like that for each C and P and R. So
Mhm.
you're not going to ask all 10, but when the time comes, you're so prepared. And you're like, you have any questions for us? Maybe some of the questions have already been answered, but you want to ask questions that Google cannot answer, right? You want to ask questions that are like, hey, I saw in the earnings call that this particular thing happened. And so is that the new strategy going forward? Because I saw that this product was taken off the shelf, and they're like, oh gosh, this person really did their homework. That shows, even if you're not interested, that shows that you're interested, shows that you're hungry, and it shows that you've been paying attention. These are very attractive qualities. Now,
Mhm.
as an interviewer, I'm like, I want this person. And let's face it, the interview process is flawed because human beings are flawed. Every one of us has biases, whether we know it or not. So when we listen to a person who's done this CPR approach or any other approach that works, in our head, we're thinking, it's the Jedi mind trick. Like, okay, I can imagine being in line at the cafeteria, and I can imagine being at the offsite with this person. I want to learn from this person. I want this person in my corner. And so when the time comes for salary negotiation, etc., um, let's just let me say it politely. Exceptions are made more frequently than people realize.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, they could be forgiving, but also they can be as heartless than people even realize. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I did when I was working around in companies, and it was a suggestion from one of my mentors. She said, "Call the 800 number with the company that you work with." I said, "Really?" Said, yeah. So I would call the 800 number and start talking to whoever the. She didn't give me any other instruction than to call 800 number, and you get a really great feel for
Mhm.
calling the 800 number because one, the best part of the company's brand and the worst part of the company's brand is going to be on the person that answers the phone who's answered 100 calls that particular day, and that's no joke because they're either great at it, they're energized, or they're not so great at it. And that's where you can really find really deep dark secrets. Sometimes if you're able to talk to one person for more than 5 or 10 minutes, you can really get some great information out of it, good, bad, or indifferent. How that relates to today is, though, a lot of people, yeah, there are 800 numbers and there are more gatekeepers and there are prompts and things like that. So it's not as easy, but people should network deeper and not wider in their approach to research. And that goes
Right.
along with what
Yes.
both of you
Yeah.
said. And what
Mhm.
I mean is that you talk to people in the company, get referrals as opposed to looking for more people to talk to the company, because the people that you talk to are going to talk to people that they know that you can talk to, meaning that they've talked to them quite often. They're in communication and it has a lot to do with their job. So you can get deeper. The more deep intel you have, is sort of like, a friend of mine has, his name is Lavi Margolin. He's a career coach. He's been for years. He's written a bunch of books, but he has a book on 500 interview questions and answers to an interview. Now, It's great to have that book, but how many of those questions are you going to be able to know about it? Same idea. Knowing having a whole bunch of things to a whole bunch of people to get is not as functional as the people who are connected to that job and that position that you're going to want. So I say network deeper, not wider in particular, though sometimes wider helps. And I don't think necessarily you have to talk to 15 people, but if you talk to 5 people that work in the department, between the 5 that work in the department or work with the department, tells you a lot of information of what you're going to be doing and the kind of conversations you're going to have day to day. That's what's going to really feed the interview process, and because that person can then, who is interviewing you, can picture you being a coworker because of what you know already. So
Mhm.
it brings about that familiarity in it. So those are our tips. Anybody want to add anything to that as far as uh, that advice is concerned before we go to the last? And we have just a few minutes left, so we can't get too deep.
Uh,
But go ahead, Damien.
I was going to say, spending that time on LinkedIn, finding common links, and just having that information and any other intel that you have when you're in conversation with a person. And remember, it's only 30 minutes. I mean, maybe you get a 60-minute interview, but not really anymore. But you just don't know what's going to resonate with that person. I was purely on an informational interview, and I happened to mention the fact that in addition to his nonprofit division, he also had a for-profit. This was a architecture, and that completely changed the whole feel of the interview. And he just stopped and he said, I have to tell you how impressed I am and how much you've researched me and know about both companies. Most people know about the nonprofit end. Very few people know that the building we're sitting in is something that I completely rehabbed from, you know, bricks up. So my point is spending that extra time, picking up those little tidbits, not only makes you a better interviewer, but it also shows the depth of your preparation because again you have these little talk points that you pick up as you go along, and many times your talk points will naturally work their way into the conversation so it doesn't look like you're forcing it, and you will come across as a much stronger, more enthusiastic, more authoritarian in terms of your area of expertise, and more genuine. And
Mhm.
one question that's always in the back of every interviewer's head is, will this person play well in the corporate sandbox? Right? If I like you, I may hire you. If I don't, I won't.
Yeah.
Mhm. Totally. Totally. Let's go on to the last question. And I think this is one where people also struggle is what to do after their final interview. You've been told that you're the one of the main considerations. Uh, People know what not to do and what to do sometimes. And I think some people get confused on what not to do. And it's going to be different for every single person, right? So, Sonal, in your estimation, what people shouldn't do after an interview, after they had the final interview?
So this is where it gets tricky because
Yeah.
how long are you going to wait? That's the thing that is not in your control. And as much as we can, we do like some sense of control. That's the way we are as human beings. So, what not to do is completely disappear and ghost. So let's say they come back 3 weeks later. It's been 3 weeks. Anything could have happened in this period of time. Maybe they found someone else. I don't know. So keep in touch. And it can even be like an email. Hey, listen, I absolutely loved meeting you no matter what happens, but I obviously hope that I get this job because I think I'm the perfect fit because of reason one, reason two, reason three. It's been an absolute pleasure meeting with you, and I can't wait to hear what the next steps are. So you got to make the ask and not be shy. uh, Remember, many a slip between the cup and the lip. It's not over till till the deed is done. And these days people don't even say, till the contract is signed. It's first day at the office. Like, that is when it's actually first paycheck. I think, Mark, it was you who said that when you came on my live stream, that is, the process starting and the process ending.
Mhm.
So, um, don't ghost, don't disappear, don't be shy, make the ask. And it's just another reinforcing thing about, I gotta get Damien. He's the right guy for the job. Did you read that email he sent? We're always seducing them because of the cover letter and all. Hey, it's coming to an end. Irrespective of whatever happens, you still want to be their number one.
Yep, yep. Damien?
Um, just a couple of other things that kind of add on. If you are so lucky is to have one or two offers all coming in at about the same time, you can slow one down and speed one up by a simple phone call.
Yeah.
If you have a very strong offer with another company and this company that we're talking about is dragging their feet, I did it. Pick up the phone and you call and you say, hey, listen, just want to let you know I have an offer in writing from one of your competitors, but I really want to work for your
Yeah.
company more, but I'm going to be in a position of having to make a decision here in the next week. And I didn't think it was fair for me to make a decision with another competitor of yours unless you knew it first. And that's how you find out how serious they are, because if in fact you are the person, they will find a way to get an offer to you very quickly because they don't want to lose you. If you've made it to that final tier and an offer hasn't come and it's been 3 weeks, 4 weeks, then you can pretty well assume that something has happened on the inside, or there is another candidate that has surfaced and is now being entertained in your absence. So don't be afraid, as was said, to ask for the job, reinforce the reason why you deserve the job, and don't disappear. One thing I used to do when I was waiting for an offer is I found another touch point, and that was found. Now, this is old school, but I found an article about something that we had talked about. And I ripped the article out, I put a little yellow sticky on it, and sent it hand addressed to the person and just said, Mark saw this article. Remember, we talked about this, thought you might enjoy, and then
Good. Yeah.
sent it to him.
Yeah.
And it
Yeah.
got a response.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, those kind of things. I think one of the things that people often do, rather than they not do, is that they are still, like I said, they remain static. They tend to do nothing, and they think that they don't want to mess anything up, so they don't go anywhere, and
Mhm.
they'll wait on the one company. And I say, even if you get a final interview with one company, there's nothing wrong with starting an interview process with another company. And even I'm beginning to think, even if you get the offer in your hand, that you should still continue to interview
Yes.
and
Yes.
even still try to get another offer. And
Yes.
it's okay even if you
Yeah.
say, well, they ask you when you can start at a date where you have some time to use some of those techniques you all have said, to try to speed up the other ones,
Yeah.
to try to get to make it sense. I mean, you have to play you have to be non-sentimental again
Yeah.
about the one company that gives you
You're not
the
cheating.
love.
You're not
They
married
show
and you're
they're
not
showing
cheating.
you affection. They're giving you flowers and candy, and you can't be phased by that because it may be misleading. You may be, it may be an abuser. It won't end well. It won't end well at all. And I guess that's it should be in the conscious and mindset of most people today, especially when the competition is dense. It is very thick, and are people maybe aren't as desperate, but there'll be those who will be willing to do more than you if you let them. That's why you can't sit and wait for a company act. You got to keep it moving until you walk through that front door the first day. And I would even argue, even then, you, as I always say, job search is a lifestyle. And
Yes.
just because you walk through the door and you go through the onboarding, maybe you may need to be quiet for a hot second, but not for all that long. You're always going to remain available to some degree. So it's a little bit past the hour, and we thank our guests very much for coming on. Sonal, what do you have coming on next that the people should know about? Is there a podcast interview you're excited to be on, or your next show, or anything? What should people
Um,
know about?
yeah, I mean, go to my website. There's podcast and live streams galore, never ending. But I do have a masterclass coming up on the 1st of December, and I can give the
Ah,
link to you. Because one question I get a lot, Mark, is, hey, can you help me with my resume? And not everyone
mhm,
can afford a resume writer. Not everyone wants
right.
one. So I feel like these are some skills that are life skills. We should all know how to write a good resume about ourselves. So I'm doing that on, yeah, a live training. It's free. It's on the 1st of December. So if anyone's interested, I'll, you know, put in the link in the comments. You can sign up.
Yeah, I wish resumes would crash and burn, but that's a whole nother show.
Yeah.
Damien, Damien, what's what you
Uh,
got coming up?
two quick things. The article that you and I have been talking about in Consumer Reports
Mhm.
is
Okay,
out now.
awesome.
Uh, and I just got notified today that the one of the UpJourney articles, they've been very good to me, is done and is also up. And I'll be sending that out. And, as always, I want to thank you both. This has been a great time, a lively conversation. And I have to tell you, week after week, there isn't a single one that I've participated in when I don't walk away having learned something new. So I want to thank you both.
Yes, always a great discussion. And our next guests that are coming up, let me put that on the board. We have a couple of them, and then I'm going to go and let us go. Uh, Next week is Deborah Matthews. Then Tegan, like I said, she comes on the third. Paula Christensen's also in the house in the chat. She's going to be up on the 10th. And then we're going to have Nicolette Barrett back on the show. And that's 12/17, not 12/19. 12/17, December 17th. That will be the last show of the year. Then we're going to be out for like 3 weeks. We're also going to be out the week of Thanksgiving, so we won't have a show at that particular time. That's why there's a 2 week gap there. But in the meantime, peace in the battle of love. Thank you very much for joining us. Join us again next Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 o'clock Central, and maybe even 7 p.m. in Belgium.
Thank you for having me on. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. See you guys later. See you next week.